This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, but the real star of today's show is James T. Kirk. Yes, you heard that right. James T. Kirk. We'll talk about that in just a moment. James, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. I am doing wonderfully well, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm very excited to talk to you in particular because I've talked to a lot of different types of people, but I think you're the first person who's really living the life you're living. We're going to get to that, that I can actually dive into the brain of. So I'm very excited to have you here. So I joked about it, James T. Kirk. Let's get it out of the way because nobody's going to believe me. Your name is, in fact, James T. Kirk.
My name is, in fact, James T. Kirk. I will go over the quote, which everyone needs to hear. My dad basically said, we saw the opportunity and took it. James is my dad's middle name. Thomas is my mum's biological dad's name. And Kirk's the family name. So now I'm stuck being a living sci-fi reference.
But at least it's a great sci-fi reference. I mean, there could be
Oh,
a lot worse people to
listen,
be named similar to.
I tell you what, I hated Star Trek for the first 7 years of my life, realizing, oh, what hell have I been condemned to? Now you just got to live it up. Like I've even got a James Kirk cosplay that I wheel out sometimes. You just got to. I'm stuck with it for my life.
You got to
So,
go
yeah.
with it. You got to roll with the punches.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Right.
I in the description I called you the face and the voice of sim racing, and
Oh,
one of many
big billing.
voices and faces. But your claim to fame is really being an announcer. I mean, that's your main gig in sim racing at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've been casting, certainly, or commentating, casting, whatever like description you want to use in this particular case. Either way, I've been doing it for over 5.5 years. I've done mostly grassroots volunteering stuff in that time, but the past couple of years has really taken off. So I'm now working with the World Touring Car Cup. It used to be the World Touring Car Championship. I was with them as well. Mercedes Benz, and certainly there are some talks in the pipelines which suggest I might be going on to do a bit more than that as well. So it's very exciting times for me, certainly.
So you've gone from sim racing hobbyist to one of the few people. It's growing number that could actually
Yeah.
be make that's a professional career. But doing it as a broadcaster, would immediately think esport in that world. We think drivers and things, but it goes deeper than that.
Absolutely. I mean, I was saying to you when we were chatting a little earlier, I consider this my job now. I consider this my career. And when I left university, I gave myself a 3-year time frame to go out there and just focus fully on trying to do something which I loved, getting started in a career that I loved, and then hopefully bouncing on from there. If it didn't work, find something else to do, make sure the hobby's still on the side. So if anything does go, then jump at it. But I'm lucky enough now to have had this breakthrough, especially in the last couple of years, where I'm humbled to be making some sort of a living off commentating on online racing. It's crazy.
That's fantastic. What did you study anything at university that was towards doing this?
History. I kid you not. I went to university and I studied history because it was the subject which I was best at school. I've always been the sort of guy where I want to bring happiness to a lot of people, and I like to entertain, and I'll talk for the entirety of England if need be. But back then, before university, I was someone who, would you believe it, was actually quite devoid of confidence. I didn't think much of myself. And throughout university, roughly when I started up sim racing casting, you get to meet new people and you get to have that positive feedback for the first time. Oh, you're actually pretty good at this. You're quite a natural. And so the confidence starts to build up from there to now, where hopefully I'm not too egotistical, but I at least know that I'm worth something, you know?
You don't come across that way. And I'll tell you, history sounds very dry by comparison to what you're doing now. So I think it's a much better fit for you.
Oh, well, I tell you what, though, it does come in handy because doing history, there's certain elements during the, well, at least my degree, where you'd have to present to people in class, which I did a few times, and which sort of fits in nicely with this whole presenting online racing scene. But also, you're doing a lot of research and a lot of organization. And I take a lot of pride in being a commentator who actually delves deep into the history of certain championships and certain drivers to try and pick out certain stats. So for example, there was this one driver who I was talking about, I think it was a month back at this point, where he'd taken part in 32 races in this single-seater division, and he'd retired in 18 of them. And I just thought, what an interesting stat to bring up, that this guy's not even finished half the races he's at this top level. It's those sorts of facts which I think really add color to a broadcast. And so I try to bring as many of them as I can.
If you don't finish, you can't win.
Exactly.
So let's go back in time real quick before we dive into the esport world. But you mentioned 5.5 years ago. Was that the beginning of your broadcasting, or just getting into sim racing altogether?
So that was getting into sim racing altogether. Someone who I love very dearly, Mr. Simon Smith, he was a commentator way back in the middle of the R Factor era. And he talked to a couple of friends. We were racing on F1 2011, I think. And he was like, oh, well, if you enjoy this, and if you enjoy a bit more, realistic, sides of the scene, then maybe you should try this. And so myself, my group of friends that I was with at the time, we started racing. But honestly, it develops very quickly from an interest in doing the racing to also talking over the racing. Actually, my dad, who you may hear a lot of during this interview, he would often criticize me for talking over F1, because I got into that around midway through 2011 as well. And it's like, oh, can you just shut up? I want to watch the racing. And I'm like, well, if I want to talk over it, then why don't I try and do that in a different, more constructive way,
That's great. That's great. So again, it was just a natural, automatic fit.
Pretty much, yeah. It's my career has been a lot of just things falling into place at the right time. Some might consider it lucky. Certainly, I'm included in that. But it's also about looking at which doors to go through and what suits you best. Because I've done everything in the sim racing scene. I've been a driver. I've been a team manager. Obviously I'm a caster as well, and I might come back to the driving and team management side of things soon as well. But casting is the thing which is stuck. That's what people have said. James, you've got a real knack for this, and I've made it my focus, and it's paid off.
Do you remember the first time you did a broadcast, like that people are watching and listening? And
I certainly do. Yeah, it wasn't even as a lead caster; it was as a co-commentator. And to guys who've been around the scene for a long time, you might remember Mr. Liam Jenkins, who's now creator of the Philly D network. Really, really great lad. And I started off over at Race Department with him on lead comms. We were commentating over this F3 championship. It was something which I felt I had to do, even though I felt I could potentially lead. I wanted to get that experience, and I wanted to get it in a very casual environment. And Race Department's always been great for just introducing people to the scene and having that great community. And I guess from there, it was lucky that my next place of work was like, well, we've seen what we can do. We like what we've seen. So let's give you a go on one of our newer championships.
That's pretty cool. So any idea how many broadcasts you've done at this point in time?
No. Oh, goodness. I would be surprised if it was under 75 at this point. I mean, maybe even going over 100. It might be nearer 125. The point is that I've been 5.5 years is a long time, and once you get settled into a rhythm, you don't really start counting. Oh well, this is my 50th broadcast or something, because they just come so thick and fast if you're in the groove of things. That it's just all experience at the end of the day. And even if you're to look at a certain number of broadcasts, to me, I'd still say, well, there's bits that I can improve on. I don't ever want to be looking at myself saying, oh, well, I'm on my 500th broadcast now. There's nothing that I can do better, because then you're not going to grow and continue to learn.
Absolutely. So you're doing your league-type broadcast. There are a lot of guys doing league-type broadcasts. I mean, there's no shortage of that going on in sim racing right now. We've seen this explosion of sim racing, and your Bono Huiz, your Enzo Benitos, your Jack Keatleys. There are a handful of guys who are going to make a living, and obviously as the talent, we'll call them in this case, the drivers. You're sitting there, and I don't know how it happens, but how does it go from I'm doing league racing to the phone ring? You get an email, hey, we want you to be the official announcer for Mercedes AMG. The whole competition we're doing, the whole enchilada, the big deal, or the Raceroom WTCR, and going to Germany, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
When and what was, I mean, how did, take us through when you made that transformation from just being the online league guy to, hey, I'm one of a handful of broadcasters doing the highest level esport competition?
It goes back to my point of a lot of my career has just been, it's fallen into place at the right time. And so the place which I guess a lot of people might recognize me from in terms of grassroots leagues, as I like to call them, the ones like just outside, not necessarily like a lower tier or anything, but individual independent people looking to make their own leagues. GPVWC. That's where I went straight from race department, and I was there for 4 years. I was doing that on a voluntary basis. I was commentating on GT championships. Most people would probably know from their equivalent of F2 or GP2, the Super Cup. And there came a point, though, at the end of 2016, where I kind of realized it's all fair and well. This is something that I really enjoy, but at the same time, I need to put effort and focus into earning a living. And so with a heavy heart, I kind of said, well, listen, maybe I'll be back someday, but I need to go elsewhere. 3-4 months down the line, a wonderful, beautiful man, both inside and out, called Robert Wiesenmuller, who is the head of Esports at Raceroom. He sent me a message, and he had both watched and taken part in races which I had commentated over at GPVWC. And he was like, well, we've got the World Touring Car Championship, and we've potentially got Mercedes AMG. They want to do championships with us this year. You're one of the first people who I thought of when it came to, bringing people on board. Are you potentially interested? And that was the first I'd heard of it. And of course, when you hear the World Touring Car Championship and Mercedes-Benz, I'm instantly thinking, excuse me, considering what I was doing before, this is mental. Through the whole interview process, it was quite tense, because I realized that this might be the big break. This might be the opportunity. And I was incredibly thankful that Rob and Raceroom and Eurosport with the WTCC and Mercedes, they all saw enough in me to say, we want to trust this guy with leading broadcasts. And so that was the transition. But there was a weird 3 to 4 month gap where I just did no commentary. There was nothing whatsoever.
So this wasn't an overnight thing. It took a while to develop.
All right. And it was out of nowhere as well.
So when you got that email, did you run with your cell phone over to your dad and be like, see, this is why I was talking over the F1 races?
It's interesting. My parents were actually very skeptical initially. They're of course, they're of a generation where this whole esports scene is still very weird, going live to watch people play games and commentating over people play games and drive online. But then they actually saw the numbers that the broadcasts were bringing in. They were looking at, it was actually a job for me. I was earning money from doing broadcasts all of a sudden, whereas before it was voluntary.
Right.
And they've really come around now, especially after seeing the interest sort of snowball in me going to do different things. They're looking at it more and more as, oh wow, actually, you know what, this is very serious for him, and this is a career, and we want to support him as much as we can.
Sure. And in the modern era, that you're talking viewership or ratings that are equal to or even superior to being like on local TV. The numbers are massive. It's huge. It's it's the same as where television was at one point in time. Now, sim racing on an esport scale of things. Actually, let's come back to that topic. So this goes into what I saw as one of the coolest events ever, which was what went on at Nurburgring. So they had 20 of the best sim racers on Earth, ready to compete in person. These are guys who I'm assuming that you've known a handful of these drivers online over the years and broadcast and called their names before. For in the big stage, let me bring up a picture and just, what was it? Was that your first in-person broadcasting scenario?
It was a lot of firsts for me, Sean. It was the first time that I had been taken out of country for work.
Uh-huh.
It was the first time that I had ever been to Germany. It was the first time I had ever been to a LAN event, let alone a LAN event that I was casting. And I tell you what, coming in through the back of the arena, so there was 1/3 of the total arena, which was sort of like the stage and the seating, and then the other 2/3 were sort of support equipment and all the trucks and everything. And I remember walking through the curtains into the arena for the first time, and that was the moment where it was like, oh, this is. I was confident going into that weekend, and then I ended up going into the arena. I was like, oh, not so confident anymore. All of a sudden, this is very real. And you're right, it was very strange because you hear a lot of the drivers sometimes when you're doing interviews with them.
Sure.
And obviously you know the names, of course. And it was a very strange feeling putting names and voices to faces in real life as well. A very rewarding feeling as well, though, because ultimately they're the same people who you've talked to online. It's just you're meeting them in a very different context.
Isn't it fascinating how there's zero context between the voice you hear and the body and face that matches up? Now, yes, when you meet them and you put it together, they're the same person. You're like, oh, I know your personality. But, like, I would, if I had, like, your audio and I had to pick names, I'd be a mess if I was like, oh, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so.
Well, thankfully for me, I've had the advantage of a lot of the guys who've added me on Facebook anyway. I'm friends with a lot of these people in general. And so I knew some of the faces, but then again, it's still different meeting them in person. But the weirdest thing for me, actually, was people who knew me, but not vice versa. And that was the strangest feeling, because you'd have someone coming up to you saying, oh yeah, I love your broadcast, and I'm like, oh yeah, thank you. I felt bad because I didn't know these guys. But at this point, when you put yourself out there to be a broadcaster, unless somebody goes out of their way to say, hi, I'm a big fan, I'm a spectator online, you're not going to know them. But then I relish in that because it's a new chance to make a new friend.
Absolutely. And it means that you have lots of fans and they're out there. So, so the drivers were obviously under a lot of pressure because this was a big stage for them. And you were under the same pressure as an announcer, dealing with it. How different is it broadcasting online where you have certain tools available and doing it in person with the type of equipment and setup? Is it the same? Did you feel the same, or was it like getting used to a new setup entirely?
Well, it's for me at least, it was terrifying at first because I commentate from where I'm sitting. Usually I'm in the comfort of my own room. I've got my office space around me and I'm used to the settings. In some ways, it's actually easier because we were blessed enough to have an audio crew of which, they were setting up everything. And so I didn't have to worry about that side of things. But even then, there's something very different to sitting down in your specially made chair for the event in front of, like a new office space. But then past the office space, all around you are a bunch of seats. You got the drivers all around you as well. And so there's a lot of different things to consider. You're thinking, well, if I call out a driver for a bad mistake, is he going to get up from his seat and, walk over and clog me over the head? Is there going to be someone in the audience who's going to heckle if I make a mistake or something? Once you get into the groove of it, it's exactly the same as when you're home. It's exactly the same skill that you're utilizing. It's just in a live environment. But as I say, it's kind of like diving into the deep end of a pool. You still know how to swim,
right?
But it's just a lot deeper.
Yeah. I mean, were you just like completely, by the time it got going, were you just like through the head, like pumped up over adrenaline and?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And actually it was interesting because I didn't know that we were going to have a camera on us in the event either. And so I was lucky. I did some YouTube content just out of wanting to learn how to edit and stuff. And I had that experience of looking to a camera as I'm doing now, of course. The whole reason I got this camera was for YouTube.
Boy, I tell you what.
And so I was lucky enough to have that ability of saying, right, well, I'm not just talking just to my screen or to whatever. I'm talking to an audience out there. Like, I can point to you right now. And I think, as I say, it's lucky that I had that experience, because otherwise it might have been a little bit of learning on the run and maybe a little bit out of my depth.
Now, I've done a handful of broadcasts online, and it's different than being, I can assume I've never been a TV broadcaster, but in TV, the production staff is leading the announcers. And I've always found that in sim racing, the announcers tend to be leading the production team a little bit.
Yeah.
Was it that sort of thing, or did you get the flip side where you're more on a real TV production side of a broadcast than a sim racing broadcast?
I think it comes down to budget in a way, because you'll see with something like Mercedes will allocate a budget to allow for a host of the event, who will then hand it over to the announcers. And I think in general, that's the way that a lot of LAN events want to go. You know, it's not just sim racing, it's the wider esports picture we're talking about here. It's good to have that one person who brings in the show, who introduces the audience, and then throws it over to the people who actually know what they're doing. In this particular case at the EWTCR launch event, that wasn't the case, but it's not so much a problem because, like you say, I'm used to introducing a broadcast anyway. And so actually that was kind of almost like a home comfort in a way. You know, I was able to ease myself into the broadcast on my own terms. I wasn't being thrown over from some other guy. It was just me, my co-commentator, who I've commentated with for 2 years now at this point. And overall, just it felt better for me for my first event. I don't think it would worry or change too much if it was something a little bit more extravagant for the next one I do.
Right. All of a sudden, we seem to have picked up an echo out of nowhere. We had no echo. Bear with me real quick.
No worries.
Very strange. Huh. Let's hope that clears up. I don't know what I can do differently. That just came out of nowhere, huh, guys? Okay, so when I talk to these sim racers, I even interviewed Jack Keatley right after.
Yeah.
Keithley. I can never say Jack's name right. I don't know why I have. They always act as though it was like no problem, piece of cake, went in there, did my thing, pressure, not an obstacle. And I believe him on one hand, and I'm not talking about Jack in particular, but you saw the faces of all 20 of these guys. They're not seasoned F1 drivers who are used to the limelight.
Yeah.
How did they look or appear after the video you pulled up, it seems? Yeah, Brandon, that's what I thought too. Sorry, I'm watching everyone. The echo is still there, and it is, for some reason, the moment I turned on a video, which makes no sense whatsoever. Give me one moment. Okay, let's just try to move on. Okay, so I'm sorry. So when you saw these guys, did it seem like they were? How did it seem like they were dealing with the pressure in general? Don't single anybody out. We don't need to make any enemies unless you want to. But were there guys that you saw that really handled it well, and others that you're like, oh, I don't know if he's going to be able to be composed. He just looks like this is getting the better of him. Forget that they're all incredible racers.
Let's keep singling out two positives then. So there is a bloke by the name of Jaroslav Honzik, and I swear he is the happiest man in sim racing. Just he lives this YouTube life as Jardier, as you may know him on YouTube. And genuinely, you can't help but smile anytime you talk at him or look at him. He was constantly playing up to the cameras because, that's just the sort of guy he is. He loves his sim racing and he loves competing. There are some days, obviously, where the results aren't going to go his way, but he's not going to, let that influence him in any way. He's just a happy bloke who loves racing regardless. I think a lot of the pressure is very much down to the individual and the things that can happen in a race. And I think it would be difficult for me as one of the hosts of that event not to talk about the big thing which happened at the end of the EWTCR event, where we had unsportsmanlike conduct and race fixing, essentially. One of the drivers who is very well known to a lot of these people, it was worrying looking over to my left-hand side and seeing one of the people in that incident exiting stage left very quickly, and the other guy almost blowing up. You know, it was that was more than anything just certification of these things. Even though you're in real life, even though you're in person, they're going to get angry if something like that happens. And to me, the reaction's totally understandable, especially when you've got €25,000 prize pool to be playing for. You know, this is money we're talking about. This is their well-being, and to have that potentially affected because somebody didn't like what the result was going to be of a certain race. You know, it's disgusting, quite honestly. But at the same time, there's this little more nuanced reaction. So a day earlier in the Nurburgring Esports Team Endurance Championship, it's a long one, it's why we shortened it to NTEC. There was this, if you haven't watched that race, ladies and gentlemen, you really should. It's on the Nurburgring YouTube channel. There's the final 3 minutes of this race of the Nordschleife, 8 hours long, and the battle for the podium was within 10 seconds of each other. This guy was in the final stint, I think it was the ACR Zaxby car, so Lewis McGlade, final stint of the race. They'd been leading the race. They'd fallen back to third. And this guy is a very good friend of mine, so he won't mind me saying. There were moments where it was just jovial, like he was driving and the camera was on him, and then he just like waved to the camera, and it was But underneath, though, so much stress. You could see on his face how focused he was. And thankfully, for his sake, he was able to hold on to that podium position. Spoiler alert, by the way. But genuinely, it was so fascinating seeing the different reactions of everyone. And in general, people just, you know, they take it cool, they take it calm. Some are super happy, like Yaroslav, of course. But then you do have the other flip side of, for some drivers, it is very intimidating being up there. And then it's very anger-inducing if something bad happens to them.
You just mentioned there being a lot of money on the line in these events. Yeah. I think of Visa Vegas, where there was the fan boost debacle, we'll just call it. Yeah. They were very quick to step in and deal with it. But part of that came with who they were dealing with, the individuals, because the individuals were just as quick to, you know, I'll call it like it is. Ollie Pacolo is really quick to say, hey, I got some cheat that happened that gave me a benefit. Ollie was the first one to bust himself and bow out, but it's a lot of money and it's a cutthroat world. Ollie could have said, what do you mean? You guys gave us our race environment. I finished second. Give me my money. I'm sorry, I finished first. Give me my money. You saw it where it was done by driver action. As the money increases, how do you think these organizations, and you know, you've worked for one, but there are a lot of them out there. Vegas was a different group. How do you think they're going to deal with it, and what do you think the learning curve is going to be like as we kind of, because these are all first events, but they're going to have things happen, and they're going to have to react. How well do you think they're going to be able to cope with various different levels of cheating, whether it be built into the game, built into the driver, or random luck sort of stuff?
I think there's a difference between what I would like to see happen and what will realistically happen in the next 2 years at least. What I would like to see happen is what we see in real sports. If you match fix in any way, you get a lengthy ban from that particular sport. Now, perhaps in terms of esports, that might have to be looked at as a wider ban, because you can be good at multiple things. You know, you can be excellent at sim racing, but then also be exceptional in Rocket League, just as, you know, an example. And if you're caught match fixing in one, then what's to say that you can't just hop on over to the other category and start earning money there? So I think that's something to be looked at, and I would like to see cheaters dealt with harshly, because quite frankly, we don't need that when we're trying to cement e-racing, sim racing, esports in general as mainstream entertainment, which it's looking very likely that's going to happen in the next decade or so. what I think is going to happen in the next 2 years is we're going to see that just slightly bed in. So the driver in question from the EWTCR event, flat DQ from the event, which I think was absolutely the correct decision.
Mm-hmm.
The guy lost, I think it was €1,000 or something.
Uh-huh.
So he literally just shot himself in the foot for
Right.
a personal vendetta. And I hope that's hammered home. If you are willing to do this, then you've got to be prepared to live with the consequences. It's not even that you're going negative from when you entered the event. It's look at how much you could gain if you play fairly, and then, see that all lost from one moment of madness. Right. I'd like to think that the guys can just learn to play fairly and realize that cheating's not worth it, but you'll always have those characters, I think, where everyone's going to look for that little bit extra,
right,
to try and make gains. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll start to see a lot more cracking down on that, until hopefully in the future we see, lengthy, deserved lengthy bans for people who want to ruin the fun for everyone.
Yeah. Brendan Lee asks if you have a favorite esport if you have a favorite esport driver.
A favorite? Oh, well, my favorite esport driver is Brendan Lee. No, listen.
Good choice. Good choice.
As a caster, I have got to remain absolutely impartial. I think it kind of depends on the question as well, because obviously I'm closer friends with a couple of the drivers more than others. When it comes to on-track action, I don't look at people in terms of favorites. Oddly enough, for me, I'm a very optimistic person, but I actually look at people who are negatives, who's going to be causing the trouble. And so I'll have less of an opinion on those people. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to just friends, I mean, off the top of my head, so Kevin Sigirebanak, who currently drives for Edge Esports, he was basically my star driver at my sim racing team, Enterprise GP. And so I've known him for a long time. I've seen him develop from someone who was kind of, fully mistake prone and, full of rookie errors, to someone who's competing for podiums and wins at, the top level of e-racing. I think Jaroslav Honzik, as I said, I just love his attitude to everything. He's such a great guy.
Yes.
Generally, listen, if you're a nice dude, I'm going to like you. It's as simple as that. We'll get on. It's great. I try not to have favorites, though, of course, because otherwise you submit yourself to the risk of bias in a broadcast, which, of course, nobody wants.
Sure. That's fair enough. I did do a broadcast season where Kevin Siggy, he actually got the nickname Mr. Excitement, because he was actually a really aggressive driver, so he was always on camera. And that didn't mean he was crashing. He actually, I think he was like in the top 3 that whole series. It was a big deal. So getting back to meeting some of these guys, again, you've known their names. You got to match the faces with the personalities. Going back home, did that change the way you broadcast certain individuals? I mean, you talk about being impartial as a broadcaster, but now you actually have bonds with certain guys, and maybe still have never met or even talked to other guys. But I think any broadcaster deals with that same scenario.
Absolutely. So generally, it was quite easy to slot back into regular life, so to speak. Of course, I've met a lot of these people in real life now, and so you're slightly conscious of calling them out if they do something wrong, but at the same time, you know that that's your job. If they make a mistake, you've got to call it, you've got to debate it with whoever you're talking with. Again, it kind of falls on that negative element. I like to base my broadcasts on stats and facts and all that, lovely jazz. And so, case in point, the guy who match fixed, I've already casted on him again this season. And we brought up he's a controversial figure, mostly because he did this.
But that's his resume at this point.
But exactly, that's his resume, and it kind of helps to craft a story. You'll have your heroes, you'll have your villains. I hope for his sake he redeems himself, and I think he's, certainly from what I've seen so far, he's starting to go some way to doing that, which is, really positive, and I hope that trend continues. For the majority of people, though, it's kind of just the same. Yes, you've met them in real life, but They're doing the same thing that they've been doing for, weeks, months, years, as that's what I've been doing for weeks, months, years before. It was probably me and my personal view on my career that changed the most, though, because once I'd done that LAN event, I was thinking, I want more of this. I want to do this, just for a living. And I've become more determined than ever to do so. Not even just in sim racing, but just as an esports caster
Period.
in general. Yeah.
So you brought that up. I saw some photos, so I know you went to a giant Rocket League tournament.
Yeah.
That's like the biggest scale of esport. I mean, there's a bunch. Rocket League being at the top with a lot of them.
Yeah.
What's it going to take for sim racing, and can sim racing even get to that level? I mean, you mentioned a stadium where a third of it was the stage versus Rocket League. It was 360 degrees, I'm assuming, of fans.
Yeah.
So
it was the entire arena. Yeah.
Do you think sim racing could ever capture that kind of an audience?
It is very difficult to try and predict that, because sim racing finds itself in a very interesting niche. I like to bill it as the most realistic esport, because it is. You've got your own driving wheel. You've got your own pedals. It is very anti-esports in a way, because usually you want the fantastical, you want flying cars, you want, large-scale military battles in your esports. You don't want something which you could watch at the weekend with Formula One or something. But my argument to that is sim racing, buck for buck, is your best racing action that you will find.
Yeah.
It is 10 times better, in my opinion, than real racing, because you don't have to worry about millions of dollars of parts flying off your car. You can go for those crazy moves as long as you keep it clean.
Yep.
The personalities are just as interesting, although I think we as a scene have got to do more to push those personalities out there. The biggest complaint is we can see it in real life. Why would we want to see it virtually? I think with the LAN event, we've proven that it can not only be done, but done well, and then it can bring as much excitement, if not more, than a real racing weekend. But it's got to have that investment, and it's got to have that promotion, and it's got to have that pull to be, this isn't just something for the elite. Anyone can do it. If you're watching in the audience, you could go home, buy your R Factor 2, or, download Raceroom, practice, and maybe you'll be on stage next year.
Sure.
I think that's the avenue which we've got to go down.
You made a great point that I never thought about. The fact that why would people watch this when they could watch the real thing? And that's a really good point that makes us very different from other esport, because obviously I can't watch Call of Duty real life. Thank God I can't watch that real life.
Thankfully, yeah.
But okay, so on the competitive level, so when we look at it that way, most of these competitions involve starting off racing at home. In my case, I use a direct drive wheel, hydraulic pedals, maybe even a motion sim, triple screens, whatever makes me comfortable. In the case of a shooter game where I'm going to use a controller, yes, I play on my couch or whatever, my home. When I go to the competition, sure, I'm on the stage. I have the pressure, the lights, the commentary, but they're still giving me the same controller that I played with at home. And I'm still looking at a monitor like I did, because they're all single screen on all those things. They're not triples. In the esport world, if I'm that direct drive $10,000 setup guy, and I come to these, for the most part, it's usually a Raceroom rig with maybe a Thrustmaster, a Fanatic, or a Logitech wheel. Basic pedals. I race in driving shoes because I have real pedals. On those pedals, I wear socks. How much of a factor is that in changing the level of competition, if that makes sense? I don't know if I phrased the question very well.
It's an interesting one, because, there's some drivers I know at the moment who drive in VR now.
Right.
which seems mental to me that they're, you know, sticking on this headset and they can look around. It's so futuristic. It's so wonderful at the same time. Honestly, I can imagine it would make a bit of a difference if you're in that sort of VR environment. Otherwise, your wheel is still a wheel. You know, it's still a basic thing that you know how to drive it. It just might be a different make. It's the same case with pedals. Like you say, you'll have some pedals that you use driving shoes with. Some you'll go with socks, and you know, it's just a case of personal preference for the drivers. Um, yeah, in terms of the triple screen, again, it's not like these people are using triple screens for every single appliance that they own. They'll use triple screens for their sim racing, and then they'll probably sit down at home, watch YouTube on their laptop or, you know, single screen or something. So I don't think that's the biggest obstacle to overcome. I think it's more actually going between different sims, because certainly, I mean, you take Yoni Tormala, for example, who's incredibly used to the very arcadey feel of Formula One games. He stepped into Raceroom, and I was impressed with how good he was. Because, I mean, considering it's his rear-wheel drive, single-seater in an arcade game, he came into a pretty sim-heavy game in Raceroom. Front-wheel drive touring cars, not easy to drive in the slightest. And he was still in Division 1, battling away for points. You could see that he was definitely hampered in comparison to what he'd be at his best. But at the same time, talent always shines through. And I think no matter the equipment, no matter the game, ultimately it's your talent that's going to be getting you the points and ultimately getting you the prizes.
Right. Did you hear any guys complaining like, oh, I just can't, this isn't my setup?
There are people who have preferences to wheels, certainly. And there was actually a difference in the so there was pre-qualifying to actually get into the top 88 to try and qualify for the 4 divisions that were going on. What was it? It was Thrustmaster for pre-qualifying, but then on stage, so for Division 1 and Division 2 for the live finals, it was Fanatec. And obviously there are people who are like, oh, why are we not using Thrustmaster on stage? But at the same time, the same drivers who were complaining were still battling for podiums and doing as well as they could do. It's obviously just like the little feelings which they might be able to edge out, I don't know, an extra 10th or something.
Sure. Crazy. So what do you think the rate of growth of esports going to be? I mean, right now, I'm still just calling it like and I guess you're in the same boat as our pro drivers. Like, yeah. It's happening, and there are these events, and other than Bono Hui with a one-time winning enough to call it a career. I mean, there are people who probably could live the rest of their lives on what his winnings were.
$1 million,
but how long do you think it's going to be until we like can just say, hey, we have a pro rank of sim racing. This is 20, 50, 100 people who no longer have other jobs, just like Rocket League. You went there and the guys on stage, not one of them have a different job in life. That is their job, right? Yeah. How long do you think it'll take for us to get and grow to there?
Oh, it all depends on investment. Again, it's all about the big companies like your Mercedes, like your like your organizations like the WTCR, and like individual games like Forza and Gran Turismo. It's all about them pushing out the message that this is something that is meant to entertain you. This is something which easily rivals, if not beats, real racing. And we can look at the explosion in the last year and a half or so, and say, wow, considering where we were 2 years ago, this is huge. I already think we have a pro rank level of driver. We got drivers on paid contracts at these top teams. That's a huge step in itself. In terms of drivers being able to pay for themselves, broadcasters like myself being able to fully pay for myself going off to these, whimsical events out in, I don't know, Europe or Asia, whatever. I would like to think that we will see that in the next 5 years. At least. Right. Honestly, it's either going to be that or the other way. It will never grow to that sort of size. Sim racing is a late bloomer because we know how long it has been around for.
Right.
And you look at Rocket League, that blew up in its first 3 months into a major esport contender.
Yeah.
So we are on a very, very different path to a lot of other esports. And so that's why it's so difficult to predict. But as I say, looking at the growth that we've seen so far, even if we were to take into account a bit of slowdown as people get used to it, 5 years, I would like to see sim racing up there competing with real racing in terms of viewer numbers.
Absolutely. So, if you were to give a little advice to like some, 12, 13-year-old who's sim racing or, whether it be broadcast or racing,
Yeah.
what do you think you'd tell them? Like, hey, if you want to really do this as a professional, these are the kind of steps. This is the 1, 2, 3 to being a paid announcer or a paid driver in the esport world in particular, which is a little different than just being a sim racer.
So we're saying broadcasting and driving.
Or either or, whichever you think you'd have advice for that little kid.
Well, I have three tips which I've picked up for any potential broadcasters out there. Number one, identify a favorite commentator. It doesn't matter what esport, it doesn't matter what real sport, or it doesn't matter what racing category. Find someone who you enjoy, because that'll be your inspiration. I mean, mine personally is Will Buxton.
Mm-hmm.
Love that bloke to death. Just so interesting, so personable on so many different levels. And I enjoyed GP2 so much because he was the lead commentator. He was unafraid to share his opinion. He was unafraid to get all excited and for his voice to break when something really awesome was happening on track. And I kind of looked at him and David Croft as well in a certain way with Formula One. And I tried to mold my style around that. I tried to be unique still. You have to try and look at yourself and say, well, what am I really looking to bring to the table here? What does, in my case, what is James Kirk? And for me, James Kirk is exciting, factual, and a little bit weird. That's what I try to bring to the table, a bit of personality. Number two, have an opinion. Don't be afraid to have an opinion, but don't have a strong opinion on stream. Because when you have a strong opinion on stream, you invite people to strongly disagree with you.
Right.
Now, I'm all about debate, and I love talking to people after streams if I've said something. So actually, to be fair, there was this one moment where I was like, if a car has the ability to go off track into a side road when blue flags are about, then they should take that opportunity as opposing, to staying on the racing road. A lot of people disagreed with me on that, but I like that debate.
Right.
And I like that it's giving people in chat something to talk about, and in this case, unify on, because they thought I was mental.
Right.
But like I say, you can't go too strong. Don't say, and I did this way too many times in my early days, don't say someone's stupid. Don't say that someone's an idiot. Don't say that someone has completely ruined the race, because at that point, you're just personally attacking them.
Sure.
Sometimes it's a mistake,
Sure.
And mistakes do happen. So even if you do that early days, try and cut it out, because it makes you a lot more easier to work with. And number three, do it because you love it. Have fun in doing it. If commentating at any point feels like a chore, and I'm not talking about the research or anything, I'm just talking about chatting and shouting at people trying to race their hearts out on track. If you don't love it, then maybe it's worth looking at a different role in sim racing, because more than anything, the thing that people pick me up on is my passion and my excitement. Nobody likes to listen to a boring commentator or to someone who doesn't feel like he needs to be there. That's the whole casting business. It's, you are a presenter, you love this, and you're watching this along with your audience. So sharing that enjoyment, sharing that excitement. As for drivers, just drive, try and be fast. Tap up some of the top teams. I'm sure they'll pick you up. I wouldn't know personally myself, because I raced on a controller my entire life, but practice and use your natural speed.
Awesome. I got to thank you. That was just like a very mediocre question that wasn't even well phrased, and your answer saved it, and it was so phenomenally perfect.
No worries.
So when you're on a broadcast, sim racing's very international.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the crazy names that you see and the mispronunciations
Oh,
that I'm assuming
boy.
you must make? And how often and what do you deal with the people who hammer you for things? I mean, like, if I call a Porsche, I get 50 emails saying I'm an idiot. How do you deal with those kind of things?
So pronunciation for me is a very big thing. I'm huge on it because I want to make sure I get the names right. Obviously, sometimes you won't, and there are a number of Polish drivers who can testify to that. Their names have confused me time and time again, and I've got to try and, wiggle my tongue around so many different syllables to come out. Actually, what's one of the worst ones is racing at the moment in Formula Challenge. Lovely bloke. His name is Thomas Andrew Harry Marisoa. And I still don't think I've got it right. That's just trying to get it off the top of my head. I think audiences have got to be understanding. Mistakes happen, right? Sometimes long names are hard. You're in the middle of action. You're trying to call it. If you don't have a nickname, this is the best that you've got.
Right.
And listen, when it comes to accents, just leave off it. One of my newer co-commentators, actually, a lovely bloke by the name of Tyler Parker. He is also an American, and so he'll say stuff like gas pedal. That's just what you've grown up with.
Right.
Everyone knows what you mean.
I'm sitting here thinking, what's wrong with that? No.
Exactly. It's just so. Audiences, I feel, and this is nothing against any of you guys, don't worry. I just think for the small vocal minority who really just pick up on any mistake casters make, be thankful that you've got such high quality commentators at this point with, fresh, clean sounding microphones, with beautiful picture quality, with an understanding of what's going on because of years of experience at this point for some of us guys. Look at what we had to deal with 4 years ago. It would be lucky if you got one stream where there was someone, with a clean microphone and knowing what they were talking about.
Sure.
So look at it in context and realize that it doesn't matter whether it's real or esport. Like, casters are going to make mistakes.
And be grateful for how much you do have.
Right, yeah.
Any drivers out there running around with nicknames that are stuck on them because you did something or said something stream-wise or during the course of a season?
Oh, Mitchie Hoyer's not going to be happy with me.
You met Mitchie Hoyer recently.
I did, yeah. We met in person for the first time, and actually, it was mostly because of him that talks between myself and Formula Sim Racing started up. So I've known about Formula Sim Racing for a long time, but I actually made my debut last month with them at their German Grand Prix for the World Championship. And I ended up calling Mitchie Hoyer a flower that was being swarmed by a load of bees. And so he's now Mitchie the Flower Hoyer.
Oh my.
And he's not too happy about that. But at the same time, this is me. I'll come out with the weirdest analogies. Sometimes they'll be absolutely spot on. As I'm adamant, this one still was. He was like a flower in primetime summer with a load of bees trying to fight over it. But sometimes it's also completely nonsensical.
Right.
It's just the case that, apart from him, I can't remember many particularly weird or bad ones, to be honest. I try and stay away from nicknames.
Oh, too funny. So, in real life racing, marketability is a big part of sponsorship and a big part of getting the rides.
Yeah.
Sim racing right now is 100% talent driven because we do it from our homes.
Yeah.
But in all fairness, and I don't know how much other esport gaming world is affected by charisma, attitude, just maybe even general looks to an extent. I think of a guy, you've mentioned a couple, but again, when I think of my go-to, like, over-the-top personality, fit for spawn, Enzo Benito. It's like you just can't stop the guy from joking around, smiling, pressure. Like, I don't even know if the guy's had a moment of pressure in his life. He just is that carefree. I know some sim racers who are very humble, very, very reserved, very shy even. Do you think that in the coming years that could be a factor as much as talent? I think about the F1 draft, and it's not 100% talent-based. I think of the competitions like GT Academy, it wasn't 100% talent-based. Do you think that'll be a bigger factor than... I mean, obviously now it's a non-factor.
Sadly, I think it will. I think that's just as any franchise or sport or category expands, sponsors are going to be interested, and sponsors want the best fit for their brand to move forward. And actually, it's interesting that you talk about sim racers being shy and reserved, because at almost every one of those podium celebrations at the EWTCR launch event, they didn't really know what to do. They were handed trophies, and then I guess we celebrate. Do we? Celebrate?
They don't know how to drink champagne from a boot.
Exactly. Like they just, it's not what they're used to. To use the old adage, they're more used to driving in their rooms or in their basements than driving on a stage in front of a load of people. And you know, I look at someone. I mean, let's pick up on two of the people we've talked about in this interview. I look at Yaroslav Honzik, and I say that guy is just going to be primed for I mean, he's already sponsored by Thrustmaster.
Right.
You know, the guy's already picked up a sponsor, and this is in the early days of e-racing growing as an e-sport. That's amazing to me that this individual one guy has picked up a sponsor. You then look at someone like Kevin Siggy Rebenak, who is a lovely bloke, really funny, really witty, but he's very reserved as well. He's got good looks to save in mind and an excellent fashion sense. So maybe on that side of things, he'll be okay. But all of these different things, you know, they are going to have an influence. And I think that's a shame in certain ways. But I would at least hope that and this is where the responsibility falls on the teams. The teams, if they want to win, still have to pick up the best drivers.
Sure.
And it's on the teams to have enough sponsors and enough interest in them to be able to pay out those contracts and ensure that they're able to pay the best drivers to then win for them. And hopefully that's the way it goes, as opposed to sponsors just cutting off individual drivers because they don't look like a model or because they're not in shape or something like that.
Or they won't do an interview. I mean, I don't.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, it's like, well, it'll be a factor. I mean, we're making that change, you know, and that's, I guess, sort of been the theme of our topic today. But it's like,
yeah,
we're right on that line where we're watching it switch from hobby to sport or hobby to profession.
Mind you, though, we've got the important distinction to make. We have this top tier now, but we still have grassroots leagues.
Yeah.
And so I know so many people who are still really like, oh, I don't like this change into, you know, super professional settings or whatever. There are grassroots leagues for you. You can still enjoy your sim racing on a community level. Look for those sites, look for those leagues, because they are still out there. And that's kind of where GPVWC, going all the way back around, it sits at this beautiful pinnacle of, there is money involved and there are very good drivers there, but it is still at its heart a grassroots league with a very strong and friendly community. Any racer looking to start their careers, I'd point to there.
Sure.
Not only because I cast there again now, but because, you know, it's just a very good place to be.
Yeah, I don't think there's any negative impact or changes anything whatsoever on a level of sim racing. Like, there are just as many, the leagues by the thousands. The amount of drivers that are being pulled away are very small when you really look at the amount of drivers. Yeah. And on top of it, the other factor, the good side, which is like your parents. You don't have to explain to them what you're doing now because of how big this has all gotten. And that changes, you know, there are people whose perception of sim racing is changing as it gets more attention, and they realize, wow, that's really highly competitive. You ever get a chance to sim race? Or are those days behind you now?
in recent years, no. I was actually okay on a controller. I did particularly well in touring cars. I took a pole position in GPVWC's in touring car league, picked up a couple of podiums here and there as well, which on a controller still I find is, I can't believe that I even did that. I think when the change to rFactor 2 came, I was very disillusioned with it because I went in, I had to try and learn the whole controller setup again because I didn't have enough money to buy a wheel. And so I was like, oh, I can't do it. You know, the tire heating's ridiculous and it's too twitchy. And so I kind of put it to the side. More recent months, you kind of get that bug again, thinking, oh, well, what if And so I might pick up something a little bit more casual in the next couple of months, just to get a feel for it again, just to, to give myself something to say, okay, well, I've had my little taste of sim racing again, now back to the casting. But here's the thing. If you were to ask me, what would you rather have, a casting or a sim racing, or like an actual racing gig? I'm going to pick casting every time because I know I'm not going to mess up in that.
James,
Exactly.
you're just a natural for it. You got the voice, you got the look, you got the personality, you got the attitude.
Oh, you're going to make me blush.
So, I got to bring this to an end, but I mean, other than the FIA WTCR videos that people could see from the big events,
Yeah.
I know that you are broadcasting currently. Let us know what you're doing currently. I know you have some things that are coming in the pike, but let us know what you're doing now and the best way for people to follow you so that they can find out about some of the big things that are coming your way.
Absolutely. So, usually every Thursday on the GPVWC channel, I guess actually that's going to be ending soon. I've done the World GT Championship, which is what it says on the tin, it's GTs. And that's actually going to be my initial next broadcast. That's coming up Thursday. I'm also helping out on their F1 equivalent, though, the Super League, and that's every 2 weeks Thursday. So next Thursday, that's when I'm going to be there. Also, keep an eye out on Mercedes, their Twitter account and their Facebook page, because, of course, I cast for them. Their calendar's weird, so that's best to look on those social media channels. But if you want to follow everything that I do, then the best place to be would be my personal social media pages. So on Twitter, I am at KirkyLife, KirkyLife. Might be changing that soon though, because my Facebook is what my persona is going to be, my gamer tag, so to speak, which is Irelique Caster, IRELIQUE Caster, and all my announcements will be coming through there.
Awesome, awesome. Kind of funny this world because sim racers are real names, but gamers are gamer tags.
And that's another weird thing about sim racing. We have so little people with a gamer tag as their, as what they go by. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see that change soon as well.
Yeah, or maybe we'll see. I at some point I wonder if Esport will go where they want to be known by their name, not their.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's possible.
James, man, it's been such a pleasure. I've really had fun. It's like this whole esport thing is fascinating me. I've been sitting in this chair for 10 years doing this, been in sim racing for 20, and I'm like, what's going on out there? This is crazy. So,
Sean, the pleasure has been all mine, and I think for both of us, maybe we should have a chat again sometime. But it's going to be interesting to see how we progress from here.
Absolutely, maybe we'll have to talk after your next big event, just so you can tell us what
For
it was like, and you can keep us on the evolution of esport in the sim racing world. So,
I'll be back, as the Terminator once said.
Thanks again so much.
Cheers. Thank you so much. Cheers.
So there you have it, the name and face of sim racing on the esports scale. James Kirk, what a great guy, what a great interview, so much fun to do that, and we'll be back with more of that someday. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.